So there's the console. That's about the only thing left in the inside of the car that I'm going to have to take out. There's one bolt holding it in from the back, and it was loose. Once I got the 3/8 inch socket on it, I could turn it by hand. So it wasn't installed very tight. Thinking maybe somebody was in that console before. Now, one of the problems I think I'm going to have, and I already have the socket on here, so I'm just turning it by hand. One of the problems I think I'm going to have is getting this off of the emergency brake, lever, or parking brake, I guess I should say, because that handle doesn't want to come off. I don't see any attachment to it. There's the bolt. The 74 had a different setup. It had a bolt that went in from the back. Trying to see if I can get this off. I don't think I have enough room in the wires. Because basically the power window switches are wired in. So I gotta see if I can figure out how to get those things out. And it looks like that's gonna have to be done pretty much sight unseen, because get this any further. I don't want to pull this off and then not be able to get it back on. That would be difficult. It would cause me problems. And then there's this strip that keeps the gap closed. Can't even get my hand up under there. Wish there was a harness I could unplug. Looks like there's one that you can unplug for that seat belt that appears to be wired into a seat belt reminder buzzer. Might be able to gain myself some slack here by taking this off of here, maybe pulling this wire around the console up front. Yep, looks like that's going to give me some more. I don't know how much. So let's see if we can do that. This is just a rubberized strip. This looks like maybe it was off before, because the rubberized strip has a gap or a cut in it. And now my wires are just hung up on the back. So I guess if push comes to shove, you can cut one of those sides of that rubber strip and that's hanging up on, but it doesn't want to go back in. Doesn't want to slide back in. There it is. And make sure I get this in here. Okay. Let's see what it takes to get these switches off. Looks like, at least from first blush, there are on each one of them a couple of 3/8 inch nuts. See if I can turn those by hand or whether I need a wrench. And they're mounted on a bracket. So if they hadn't wrapped the brake light switch around these wires, that would have made it a lot easier. Again, I don't know if this is factory or not, but there's a switch under there that turns on the brake light on the dash if you have the parking brake set. See if we can get that out and get some more room to work. Yep, that's held on with a single Phillips screw. Let me see if you can see that. Maybe there's a easy to remove clip on it. Maybe if I take a closer look, but let's zoom in on that guy so you can see what I'm talking about. So right there, there's the switch. This little wire, which is around it, I don't want to go pulling on that too hard because that's probably not one that comes off, although I don't know how to replace that switch if you can't pull the pin out or pull the wire out. So let's take that off and get it out of our way. Doesn't appear like there's any wiggle room in it, so that it shouldn't affect any kind of adjustment unless there's wiggle room that will be apparent after I take the screw out. So there we go. Might be able to pull that pin out. I'm not going to do it because I don't need to. These wires are free. I'm just going to put this guy back in. There's a little tab on here that goes in a hole, and then there's a hole in the parking brake lever, and the screw goes in there. Again, I don't know whether this is factory or not, but so when the little parking brake is off, this tab here comes and presses that button. Let's see if I can do it with all these wires here. It worked just fine whenever I had it in the console. There. It must be that the console helps align that. So that gives us the inside of the console. So one thing I want to point out first is the hole where the screw went in from the back, and on the 74 it was a much heavier screw, and what you could do is actually turn it around. Yeah, I don't have any kind of, let's zoom out. What you could do is turn it around and screw it in from the inside of the console, and then just stick it through this hole and put a nut on it when you put it back together. Even though the bolt came out from the inside and there was a nut welded on the inside, you could screw your bolt in through that screw. It made it easier to align. Although I don't know if without being able to take that handle off, that might be a little bit of a problem. So my battery's low. I'm going to change it and take those switches out, or at least one of them. Okay, so here we go with the switches for the power windows. I think the only one I have to take off is the one for the driver's side. And I had a socket, there it is. So let me get this lit up here better. I'll zoom in on it. Okay, while I'm studying here, I think I can shut that off, but before I do that, I'm going to zoom in on the switch I'm trying to get out. So the switch is right there. And at first glance, it looks like you could take 2 nuts off and it would come out. However, on further examination, it looks like you have to take that entire metal piece off to get the switch out. So I'm going to examine it some more, make sure that I have to take that all off, and then turn the video back on there. So I've taken 5 of the nuts off just to speed things up on the video. I'll point them out. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. And I'm going to take the 6th and final nut, and that should come off, I think. I don't know what I can't see. If you've been following along this project, there's a lot of stuff that you think it's disconnected, and then all of a sudden, nope, another piece there. So as soon as that comes off, those switches are loose. And let's see, if this was over, the driver's side would be this one. So, the question is, how do you get them out of here? This all pulls off. That's part of the assembly. I think that may pull off of there. It looks like I'm going to have to get a small screwdriver into there. I'm going to get this console out of the way. And there's a little crack in this, so it may get replaced. After all the money I'm putting in everything else. The screws are a little bit tough to get started there. I'm sorry, the nuts are a little bit tough to get started. I'm going to find all the others and make sure I've got them. No need to record me searching for the nuts. Okay, I'm going to see if I can pry the connector off of the bottom of the switch. Hopefully this is getting it into the frame for you. Yep, that's how it comes out. 3 wires. The way DC motors work, if you reverse the polarity of the current, they go the other way. Now, I don't know if this is designed that way or not. It could be that there are separate, you know, it looks like there's a hot wire coming into this. There's three pins on this. So one of them's a hot wire coming in, and it sends current out on one of the other two pins for up or down. Looks like it can only go on one way, so I don't know if the switch is bad or whether I've got a bad motor in my door, but I'll have to test it and see. So I'm going to document the way those were in. Unfortunately, I took the one out without documenting it, although I may have it on video from when I removed the switch. But the connector for the driver's side has blue and light brown wires, and in the middle there's a pink wire with a white stripe. And because of the way this is bent, you can almost feel that the blue wire has to go towards the back, the brown wire towards the front. On the passenger side window, it's got a green wire, then a darker brown wire, then a black wire. And by the way it sits in there, again, I would think the green wire's towards the back, then the brown wire and the black wire towards the front. So I'm going to take this switch off just so that I can get this bracket out of my way. It tends to hurt when you kneel on something like that or lay on something like that. It's easier to get these wires up out of the way without that. So I'm going to try to keep the passenger side and driver's side switches in there. It's really hard to tell which way they're supposed to go. I may have to get enough of this together to hook up power to it so that I can tell which one, or there's the old wiring diagram trick, I could do that. So what I'm going to do is test the switch for the window, up or down. So I've got my ohm meter set to, my digital meter I should say, set to ohms. And when you have an open circuit, the reading will be 1 on a digital meter. On an analog meter, the needle won't move off of the 0. So by connecting these, that's the positive and negative lead to the meter, I find that my meter is working because I have continuity now and it registers. It's always a good test before you go ahead and test anything with ohms. Just make sure your meter works. So I believe this is the passenger side window switch, I believe, because I may have mixed them up, but this should be a good one. So I'm going to connect the plus lead to what I believe is the terminal feeding power to the switch. And without pressing the switch, I should be able to contact either of these poles and not get a reading. I'm going to pull it one way, and I should get a reading on one of them. So there, I'm pulling it down, and I have continuity through that switch. Now I'm going to go to the other post and push the switch up, and again I have continuity there. Okay, without pushing the switch, neither one of them has continuity. So that tells me that switch ought to be good. I'm going to go get the other switch. So now I've got the switch from the driver's side window, and I'm going to do the same thing with it. I'm going to connect it to the power lead and touch the lead down here. And I have resistance, or I have continuity, but I've got a lot more resistance than I had on the other one. The other pole, I'm going to push it the other way. And I have continuity there too. Oh, no, I don't. Or do I? I'm wondering if I was contacting the frame of the meter. These appear to, that has about 13 ohms resistance. Going the other way, I have somewhere between 17 and 20, I'll say. I wonder what it should be. And connecting the two outside terminals as should be. No currents flowing. I go get the first one I tested. Just to see what the readings are. I may have to investigate what it should be. So here's the original one again. Gotta be careful to not connect this to the, so that it can touch the metal part of the case. So oh no, this one's reading about 17. Go the other way. Okay, according to that, I would suspect both of these switches are good, which means I either have a problem in the wiring or in the wiper motor. that will require some further investigation. It's time to investigate why my window won't go up and down. Well, it won't go down. Last thing it successfully did was go up. I'm trying to find a screw head in here. That handle is screwed into the door. It was turning, but it wasn't coming out. So there's one. There's another one. In there. Don't know if I'm on the head of the screw. There. Got on the head. That's the handle that you grab from the inside to open and close. Now the door handle has a Phillips screw right back in there. And I need a slightly longer tip on my screwdriver because the handle's hitting the door handle on the car. So I got a longer screwdriver, but this tip may be too big for that screw. And if that's the case, I'm going to have to go get my driver bits out. But you have to pull the handle out a little bit. Too big. Have to get another trick. Okay, this should work. Got a nut driver holding a with a 1/4-inch socket holding a 1/4-inch driver bit. That should get back in there. It's out. I hope I don't drop the screw. Magnetized. So that's the screw that holds the handle in. to come off. Now there's one more thing that needs to come off, and that's this door lock. There's a little clip inside there that in the past I have gotten them off with screwdrivers. This doesn't have a wide enough gap. I have to get a screwdriver in there, or maybe a pick. Bet you I can grab that with a pick. So I'm going to try to go after it with a pick like this. I'll insert it between the door and the knob and try to twist it just enough to grab the pick and pull it out, or the clip and pull it out. Now I've learned that because of the way this door is designed here, if you put the clip on this way, it's easier to take out because you can put it on either way. Pick down and show you the clip. So the clip just looks like that, and there's basically a seal type thing in back of it. And the clip is in between here, and you'll see on here there are two grooves. So you actually can put the clip on to the knob like that, and then line up the knob and press it on, because the shaft that it goes on, see if we can zoom in on it from here, has a bevel on it. Oops. Has a bevel on it that allows that clip to ride over it, and then there's a groove. Once you get it over that lip, it goes into the groove, and that's what holds the knob on. So I'm going to leave that clip on the knob so it doesn't get lost, and I'm going to start to take this off. And as you can see, it doesn't take much effort because this is pretty much warped pretty badly, and it needs to be replaced because it doesn't even sit up against the door anymore. So once you get that out, there's a bunch of plastic that kind of keeps things from getting too much water in them. Normally what I would do is I'd just flip this over the door if the window were down. I'm going to have to get some tape and tape it up because I need to get access to the window motor down in there to be able to test it. So now we're able to get at the cover for the window motor. They're some more of these number 8 metric screws. That one's not holding the cover, but it's a different size. So there's a total of 6 screws holding that on. I've got 5 out. Oh, looks like there's been some animals in there. Maybe that's why my motor isn't working. Get some gloves and clean that out and see what we got. Okay, what I'm going to do is check for continuity on the wires. They are the same color at the switch, so I'm going to take the pin I had here. Let me back the camera up, I think, because you're focused in on that. So I had the one clip on the wire that had been plugged into the ignition terminal in the fuse box. I'm going to take that clip. There's 2 wires here, a blue and a brown. So I am going to might be hard to do. The contacts for the windshield wiper, I'm sorry, the window motor switch are hard to get at, so I'm going to have to see if I can come up with a good way to get some contact on that so I can test those. Okay, I've got a pin from a lead from the ohm meter stuck in the wire on the door side of that wire, and I've got the ohm meter set up that hopefully all I have to do, I don't know if you'll be able to see me do it, but you can see the ohm meter is reading 1, which is an open circuit right now. The 1 is way over on the left. Right there. And what I am going to try to do is, without knocking that off of there, I'm going to try to stick the other probe into, I've got it in the brown wire on the thing, so I need to stick it in there on the brown wire. So that's showing me continuity. So the wire's good there. Let's stick this on the other side of the wire at the door. Let's see if I can show you. There's the connector. it's got two little spring types things there. And what I'm doing is I'm sticking the probe on the outside of it so I don't spread those connectors whenever I put it back on. I want them to be tight against the terminal on the motor. So we're going after the blue wire this time, and again, jam this in the outside. I hope you saw that. And then we'll go back on the inside, and maybe you couldn't see the meter on the last one, but yeah, that's going to be better. So we're testing the blue wire right now. Off the top of my head, I do not know whether blue is up or down. So that has continuity. So it would appear that the wiring up to the motor is good. So that would lead me to believe that the motor itself isn't working in the downward direction. So there is one thing, and I'm going to have to take it off eventually anyways, because his hinge bushings here are shot. And there's a cover here that covers the top two hinge bolts. I'm going to have to take those off. I'm going to have to take the bottom off as well, but there's access to those right here. I have to go find my, look, there it is, it's on my drill. There will only be two bolts holding this plate on. I don't know for sure, but I'm wondering if this will give me access into the limit switch, because that could be the source of the problem as well. So I've got a couple of prying tools, notably my tack puller and a screwdriver, to pry that cover plate off. All of that gives me access to the 4 screws for the hinge. Pull the door onto the hinge. So, I guess my next move will be try to put some power to each of those pins right there, the electrical connections. Let's see if it does anything to the motor, because that limit switch has to be between I would think between here and the motor, because current's going to go to one of these 2 pins into ground from there to run the motor. So I gotta figure out how I'm going to get some juice to that. So I hooked up a battery and I hooked a positive to each one of these and grounded it and all I got was sparks, which kind of tells me that the motor is probably internally shorted. So the next step would be to take this out. Bench test it, but in looking at the Haynes manual, it tells me to, for power window motor replacement, it says until the arm is locked, as described in steps 1 and 2, do not attempt to detach the motor until the arm is locked as described in steps 1 and 2. One says remove the regulator assembly, refer to section 21. So going back to section 21, it says remove the trim panel, refer to section 17, I've already removed that. With the window fully up, remove the sash bolts. Well, I guess I'm glad that it failed in the up position, because I don't know how I would have gotten it up. At any rate, after you remove the sash bolts, it says remove the nuts retaining the glass. Remove the window crank housing, 3 screws. Now, this is for a manual window, so it doesn't have a window crank housing, at least not that I can see, that it's held on with 3 bolts. So I referred back to the window glass removal and installation. It says remove the door trim and the outer seal assembly. Raise the window fully to line up the 2 sash screws through the access hole. See illustration. Okay, so they're supposed to be here. I didn't look at the illustration. I was looking at these holes, which I seem to be able to, I see bolts there, and they are attached to the glass. So I'm going to have to study this some more, and I'm also going to look at my other manual up the house, because it would seem that this description is not terribly good. But in the meantime, I have put back on the handle that opens the door with a long screwdriver, and I've got the clip for the lock in the lock knob. I'm going to zoom in on that place where I'm going to be working, trying to put this lock on. Okay. It's right there in the center. You can see that groove in that pretty much in the center of the, I can't get it exactly in the center, but I'll point it out. There's a groove in it, and that clip fits around that groove. It is right there. I have already put on the thing that fits up against the upholstery. And as I said, I'm going to leave this hook where I can grab it from the front easily and just push this on. It's going to not cooperate with me now. done this before this way. Not going to cooperate with me. Okay, do it the other way. Pull it out a bit. Fortunately, I didn't put my pick away. And got it. Trying to put it on backwards, that's a bad thing. See, things don't always go easily. And that's why I like to show you when it doesn't go easy, because I've seen people that obviously, they seem anyways to, it's not even going on with the clap. What's the story here? I'll have to put it that way. Okay, let's try this. Find where I set the clip now. Nah, right there on the... Since it seems to want to go on, if I flip it 180 degrees, try it that way, the clip. I'll be darned. I've never had that problem before, but it would only go on one way. So, as I said, I can't even see the holes that they indicate in the there aren't any bolts visible in the shaft, in the sash, I'm sorry, through these holes. Whether I would raise it up, lower it down, but there are holes, bolts visible here and here. So the other manual that I have at the house is the 76 specific manual. So you couldn't even see what I was pointing at. Okay. So I was using the flashlight to look in this hole and that hole, and I cannot even see any bolts visible in any direction. But I can see one here, and I can see one here. So I think those are the two bolts that have to come off on the 76. Now these Haynes manuals, they are for a whole series, like this says 68 through 82. So maybe there would be better instructions in the manual that I have at the house. So I'm going to call it a day, and hopefully go gain some knowledge and see if I can get this thing done the next time I'm down here. Okay, I did quite a bit of research yesterday and this morning concerning this removal of the windshield, I'm sorry, not windshield, but the power window motor. And as I stated yesterday in the Haynes manual, it says power window motor replacement, and it is telling you to remove the entire regulator assembly. But one of the videos I've watched, a guy actually removed this without removing the assembly. Well, he removed the assembly later. So I've done something here that wasn't in his video, because now one of the things in the Haynes manual says that you don't want to unbolt the motor from the assembly because the spring mechanism will release, and it could be dangerous. So what I have done is I've put two quick grip clamps on the window that will prevent it from falling suddenly. And having looked at the way that regulator assembly is set up, the part that is spring loaded can't move without the window moving. So if I can keep that window up there, or at least make it so that it doesn't fall suddenly, I think I can get this out without taking everything out, which means the window, pretty much all of the window mechanism in here And the other thing that guy did is he cleaned this motor and got it to work again. So I might try that. But basically there's 3 bolts back here. I have a ratcheting 7/16 inch wrench, not a socket wrench, that I'm putting back here to get those 3. And then there's a plate that goes on that those 3 bolts hold in. I'm going to work on the one that's furthest away next. And the reason I want to do that is because I don't want to be reaching that far in there on the last one. When this last one comes out, I'm going to try to keep it engaged with that plate so that I know which way to put the plate on. As I'm loosening this, trying to watch for signs of things shifting. Let's see if I can. Better get a light and take a look in there because I'm getting the screw out and the plate hasn't moved. See if I can see in there to make sure I'm going to be able to put it back in the proper orientation. Okay, I got some additional light and I've got a screwdriver to pry the plate off with. I'm sure my hand's going to get in the way as I pry it off and try to catch it. But basically the plate is right there. Okay. I'm a little bit afraid to put my hand too far in here because it feels like that plate is, oh, there you go. So there's the plate. It's got a tab on it that's got to go toward the motor, so it was in this way, and this tab goes toward the motor. So it would appear that this came out and was totally free now of the moving mechanism. So I think one bolt here is all that's, you probably can't see that because of the way the light's shining. One bolt right here is the only thing that's holding the motor in. We will go and take that one off. It also appears to be a 7/16. I'm watching for signs of anything moving, and I really don't see anything moving. Now, it's a question of whether or not I'll be able to wiggle the motor out without loosening any of these other bolts and messing up my alignment of all the stuff that's in the inside of the door. That just removed that bracket. That motor is still tight in there. I think there are two smaller screws or bolts holding it in. I'll try to take a look behind there, see if I can see that is definitely the case. At least see where my hand is whenever I they're round. They might just be alignment pins, so I might have to loosen up the bolts that hold the assembly in there to be able to wiggle that motor out. So it looks like 3 bolts hold that. Maybe I just need to pry this away from the assembly. Need something longer to pry with, I think. Okay, got a long screwdriver. Trying to see, maybe those are screws holding that to that. I don't recall in the video that I watched I'm doing anything with screws in there though. So I will say this about the video that I watched. The guy had a tendency to say things like, now I'm going to take the motor out. And he would shut off the camera. And all of a sudden the next thing you know, the motor was out. So it could very well be that he did take out bolts and screws and just didn't tell you about them. Trying different sizes of sockets here. Seem to be too small. So I'm up to a 5/16. The other seems too small. That seems too big. What that means might be metric. Taking bets. Who thinks it's going to be at 8mm? That's what all the other metric sockets or bolts seem to be. If you took that bet, you lose. That appeared to be too big, so we're going with trying a 7. That appears to be too small. Make sure it's really a 7 and that they're in order. Can't really see what I'm doing here, so I may be hitting different screws. I'll try that 8 again. Nope. Try what feels like a different screw. Nope. Back to the standards. Nine 30-seconds. Seems too small. Five/16. I'm just double checking these and make sure I've got them in the right position on my socket holder. seems too big. 9/32 seems too small. Okay, enough of wasting your time. I'm going to shut off the video until I find out something that will work. Okay, apparently they weren't holding it on. I put my screwdriver in here between the motor and the mechanism in there. There appear to be some rivets in there. This fell out, so I don't know which way it goes in. Obviously that's it. That came out. So it was attached only by those three things. There are little raised portions that go into bigger holes on this bracket here. So you can get the motor out without taking out the mechanism. So the Haynes manual might be just a bit misleading. I'm going to take this over and see if I can bench test it. So here's the results of my bench testing of this motor. I'm going to shove the hot connector in there and touch the ground to the case of the motor. Other side. So, the motor works. It wasn't able to move the window yesterday whenever I tried to test it on the car. So, I guess it's back to the drawing board. I have to see if that mechanism inside the door is bound up, and if so, see what's going to be required to free it up. Maybe it's just a matter of lubrication. I don't know how powerful those motors are, but it sure didn't want to work yesterday when I put power to it. Okay, my guess is that without the motor connected to it, this assembly ought to be able to move. One thing I am going to do first, though, is I'm going to tighten up these two. Now I'll have to loosen them again to get the motor back in. But I'm going to tighten those up so that there's no binding to the tracks. And see if I can manually lower and raise this window, and if I can't, I might be making big trouble for myself. Here's one of the clamps that was holding it up. I'm going to grab the window, release the other clamp, and Did that go down okay? Now, let me say this about that. There does seem to be a little bit of corrosion on the pins on the motor, so I'm going to see if I can clean that off and reinstall it and see if it will operate the window. So I'm absolutely running out of room to put things on my workbench, but here is the gear that was in there. As you can see, there's some pretty caked on what used to be grease. It's supposed to be grease. I can't even get it off with a screwdriver. So maybe that was just binding up the motor, because as you recall, when I took this out, that fell out. So I am going to spend some time cleaning that up, and also the inside of the where the motor sits, or the gear sits. That's not near as sticky, but I'm going to clean that up, put fresh lube in it, and then we'll put it back in and see what happens. So I've got the motor moved up and the contacts cleaned up a bit. What I'm going to do here is just reach inside here and put some lube, some wheel bearing grease inside these tracks. I'll make it as easy as possible for the motor to do its job. I thought that there would be some switches in here on the tracks to limit the travel of the mechanism that the window rides in. But all there are is rubber bumper stops at the end, and apparently when the window gets up to them, the motor just isn't strong enough to push it up any higher. And I guess human beings are kind of conditioned that when it's up, they take their finger off the switch, because it sure seems like you could do damage by riding that switch longer than it needs to be. So I'm lubricating the bottom of this, but that wasn't the problem. It wouldn't come down. So at any rate, that probably wasn't a good idea to do that with the window just sitting up like that. If it had fallen down, I might have got my fingers pinched. But it didn't, so running this down. Let's see if there's anything else I can grease. Yes, I can get some grease in the track that goes horizontally here through that the window rides in. Let me move the camera and show that. So here's the track. Right here, I'm going to grease that. I'm going to zoom in a little bit while I grease it. But when I push it down by hand, it goes pretty smooth. So I think once I get this greased up, I raise it back up. Put it in. Okay, I can reach in a little bit beyond those. This is where the wheels are running it. I think I can get in a little bit beyond those. Maybe not. Kind of easier said than done. Yeah, I can do it on this side. Can't quite reach it on that side. Let me move the window up and see if I can get it by moving it up just a little bit. You know what? There might be a little bit of crud in that channel right there. Just barely get my hand in it. Not really bad, but I can get some grease in there, make it a little bit smoother, hopefully on the, that would be near the top of the travel. So I think I've got that lubed up probably about as good as I can get it. I'm gonna raise the window again. As I said, it's working pretty smoothly. I don't know what orientation this clamp was in. I think it was towards the bottom. It's bent like it needs to bend over it. There's a little ridge right here. It's bent like it wants to sit over that. I'm going to see if I can get the motor in with that loosely in place. Okay. Let's hold this up out of the way. Zoom out a little bit. I had loosened 2 bolts, and I'm trying to see if I can see them on the frame here. Yeah, they should be in the frame. I had loosened these 2 before. That'll give me a little wiggle room on the bracket to insert the motor. So I kind of think I've saved myself hours of work here by not following Haynes and by deviating a little bit from the videos that I've watched. So the challenge to getting this back in is going to be to get these, there's little ridges right there that go through the bracket here, right here. I don't know if that's probably not in the video frame, but those have to go through, and the gear has to engage the toothed, it's kind of like a half of a gear because it's not round, it's only toothed far enough for the travel of the window. But that's going to be the challenge, and then of course lining this up properly, and it's got to go over that shaft. On the gear, and then line up with the holes that are going to go in the bracket, and then there's a place for that tab to go. So let's start. Okay, there's one. I think they're all lined up. Can't tell if that tab is lined up, but I think it probably is, because I don't see how you could line everything else up. This is all braille here. That's not too bad. There's 2 screws inserted, and they're in tight enough that they're holding up against the bracket. So I think the bottom one's the toughest to get into because there's little room for your hand. So I started with the top closest to me, easiest to reach. Next I went to the one furthest in. It's over here somewhere. One's about here, one's about here. And the bottom one would be back here. So those seem to all be in place. And this bracket just seems to pull the assembly to the door. So that is indeed what it's doing. It's pulling the assembly through the door. Not really attached to the assembly, but yet it pulled it in. I'm a little confused about that, but okay. One is tight. Two is tight. Probably should have tightened that one more by hand before I put the wrench on it, because the other two pulled it in. Let's see if I can do that. This is a brand new set of Harbor Freight ratcheting wrenches, and it's a little difficult to get the nut out of the grip. So they grip really well. Yeah, by tightening that by hand, it makes it ratchet easier. And since this is getting pulled in, I'm going to go around and check all three again. Wouldn't want to come off. Guess that should be a good thing if you're worried about the wrench slipping off of the bolt. My hand's stuck in there. So that's two that have been double checked. Let's get the third one. That one's pretty tight, much as I expected. I'm gonna tighten these things up that we loosened. I don't know if I have this bracket in right, in spite of the fact that it looked like it went on that. I'm wondering if it's supposed to go. Doesn't really hold the find another way that seems better. Now that everything's bolted, because it's loose, it's really not holding anything. Other way for it to fit. But it doesn't hold anything. That's interesting. The bolt is only long enough to get into there. There's nothing close enough back here for it to bolt to. If you try to flip it this way, it doesn't fit. You know what I see? Aha. This is actually broken off. What did it break off of, though? Didn't notice anything on the front of the motor that looked like it was broken off, and this looks right here like maybe a bolt would have been there. Certainly fits as if. It goes down towards the bottom of the channel like this. It's the perfect dimension to bolt in there. And it rides against the curve of the inside of the door panel. Huh. Let me see if I can find in this manual a picture of what some of that stuff is supposed to look like. Okay, so I actually got that to fit in a different way. Let's just take it out again since it wasn't that hard to do. And I'll show you the orientation it went in. Okay, maybe it was a little harder to get in. Went in easy, can't get it out. There you go. So what I was able to do was put it in there behind this hole like that, and this kind of caught on the motor. It gave it some stability. So let's see if I can get that back in there again and get it screwed in. Still not. I wish there was a picture of that darn thing. Maybe I should take it all out, and since you've seen it come out and go back in, I'm not going to video it, but I'm going to take it out and inspect it, see if maybe it needs to be welded on. Okay, I found where the broken off piece came from, or where it connected to, and I'm going to zoom in on it. Okay, you can see this shiny part here that I ran a wire wheel on it, and there's a bracket right there that's riveted to that. And this, if I can try to get it in here without not getting my hands in the way too much. Sat right there, and if I can locate the hole, I'm going to screw it in. So this sat right in the back of that. Right there. And if you get this positioned right, there's just enough of that where it broke off from the at the rivet that you can get a little bit of a mechanical binding there. Just a little bit. So what I'm wondering is, there is a little bit of a mechanical connection. And I seem to have misplaced my wrench. But I had it in there before where it was tightened here and a nice clean connection right there. I had it, I promise you. But at any rate, I'm wondering, since once this is all tightened up, now granted I would get it in better than that, but I need my wrench to do that and I can't locate it right now. But if I would just put a lot of JB Weld on both sides of that and in between it, get it lined up correctly, and use a clamp to clamp this way and let it dry, whether that would hold it well enough. Because, and I'm normally not a fan of doing that kind of stuff, but it's $100 and some for the mechanism plus a lot of work. So if I could do that, get it to work, and to be honest, if it failed, it wouldn't be the end of the world, because I know what the likely cause is and I know how to do the job. So I'm thinking about doing that. It's not really what I normally would do, but in this case, considering the cost and the effort, that might be worth a try. And I'm sure, there's my wrench. Might have to loosen those bolts to get it in the proper position, but as I said, if I can get that in there, and I'm sure I can, because I had it in there before, it just being stubborn because I'm trying to do this on camera. There's how I can get it. You can see that that's fit in there very nicely. And if I had a bunch of JB Weld behind it and then put a bunch of JB Weld on this side, I've cleaned it all up so it should adhere pretty well. And I think that should hold. Like I said, I'm not a particular fan of doing things that way, but cost and effort wise, I can always do the cost and effort later. It's not like I have to have the car laid up while I do this. But I think that would be a repair that JB Weld might actually work.
So I think that's what I'm going to do. I'll clamp it up like that after I put JB Weld on it. Unfortunately, I have to go get some. But clamp it up like that, leave it set a day or so, and then put the motor back in and give it a try. It might be that since that broke, the thing here was binding because the motor was torquing. That might be why it wasn't operating, because it seemed to operate smoothly when I put it up and down by hand. Trying to see if there's anything else I could do to somehow just keep this from going that way. If there's some way I could brace it and not get in the way of anything else. There is a tiny hole. There's a tiny hole over here that maybe I could get some sort of a thing through. I don't know. I don't think I took anything out of there when I took it apart. But like I said, I'm not a big fan of trying to do things that way, but there is a large effort and relatively large cost. But I think we can make that work without spending that money and that time. So here's my proof that I think my theory is good. I still have, let me get this light out here. I still have this bolt over here holding the broken piece of the bracket on. And all it is underneath of that top rivet, and it's holding it in place. And as I said, I think if I put JB Weld on there and let it dry overnight and put quite a bit of it on this side and underneath, and I think it will hold because of that rivet giving me some bit of mechanical connection. It will take the strain off of the JB Weld. So we're looking at the door panel, and I am preparing to put some JB Weld in there to join this bracket where it cracked off of the windows assembly. So I found that I can get it in place and it does hold, so there's a bit of a mechanical connection, but I need to get some JB Weld in there to hold it permanently, or semi-permanently, as the case may be. So there's where it's broken. I'm going to put some JB Weld in here, put that back in place and tighten it up the way I had it. Probably lock it in place with a pistol grip clamp and let it cure for at least the 24 hours or whatever that they recommend. So JB Weld is a 2-part epoxy reinforced with steel, it says, and it says it has a PSI of 5,000 some odd pounds once it's cured. There it is. So I'm going to back this off, and whatever you mix it on has to be disposable because you're not going to get it all off, and it's going to dry to a very hard consistency. So I'm going to wear some gloves while I mix it. And the exact PSI is 5,020 pounds per square inch. So the instructions state to mix equal amounts, and what I've got to mix it with is a popsicle stick. So I'm going to open up the JB Weld. It's a 2-part epoxy. So 1 part, I forget what they call it here, but there's a hardener and another thing. I thought I saw the name of it in the store whenever I was buying this yesterday, but apparently I'm mistaken. I might have confused it with another brand, the Gorilla brand, and the reason I chose JB Weld over Gorilla is the PSI for the cured product. It doesn't stay on here whether that's tensile strength or whatever. So I'm getting about 2 equal parts, as near as I can get them. That looks about right. And I will mix those together. It's a fairly thick consistency. It really isn't that hard to mix. Now I'm going to focus back in on the part I'm trying to repair. And zoom in on that again. That's actually zoomed in close enough. And what I'm going to do is try to get some behind here where the actual metal broke. So I've got that there, and I'm going to try to build up some in behind it where this curve of this piece that broke off can bond to it. And then when I'm done with that,
put some over the top of the outside, but first I want to get a good coating in there. Part of the reason I have these gloves on is I may resort to just putting it in with my fingers. And you don't want to do that barehanded. So I'm going to pull this. Sorry, my hand's in the way, but I've got to get it in there. Not quite in there yet. I need to loosen this a bit more. I just knocked my wrench off. Okay, loosened it a bit more. Okay, I've got it squeezing out through the gap where it joined. There, it's actually held in place by that. We're going to take some more of this epoxy and glue up this inside if I can get my hand in a position to do it. Checked before I started this that even if I pile this up a bit, I am going to have clearance for the motor to fit. So I can be generous on applying this. Didn't remember if I had tightened that, so. I'm gonna have to mix up some more of this. So I'm gonna shut the camera off while I mix it. No need to show you that twice. Okay, I've got some more mixed up. I'll try to lay it on there thick. There's a bit that's got to come off. That's hitting the area where the motor goes in. We don't want to have that. Have too much on it, although you can drill and sand this. It's actually got steel particles in it, so you can file it. That's a pretty good coating there. I'm going to try to get some in the back of it. But that probably would be enough to hold it. And as a reminder, I did get some in the back where it made the bend. Let's see if I can get my finger back there. I'm gonna try to get my finger back there with some on it. Fortunately, this broke off where there's no moving parts that go by it. Did manage to get some in the back there. It's hard to reach some. I wish I could have gotten it better, but I think it's adequate, especially since I've got a good coating right in here on this side of the crack. That's a very good coating. Call that done. About as good as I can do. If it holds, I will save myself a fair amount of money and time and effort. If it doesn't, then I'm just back to where I was in the beginning, faced with taking off the inside mechanism. So that's a wrap for that. I'm going to move the camera and give you a different view of what it looks like. Not the neatest job, but it should hold it.
So there's the repair I did with the JB weld. You can see it in there. Piled it up pretty good. So it should hold. Now, you might have noticed there's a pipe there. That is a support for my door for my next project, which is going to be replacement of the door hinge pin. Okay, we've finished putting the hinge pins in. I'm making a separate video for that since someone may want to know how to do it without doing the replacement of the motor and that. But to be honest, it's probably a good idea to take the motor out. Makes it a little bit lighter, and you can disconnect this wire and get the door completely out of the way. Now, I'm probably going to be in the way a little bit as I try to do this, but the motor goes in and then a plate goes on it. There are holes in the assembly here that little studs from the motor go in. I may have to loosen that up to slide that in. I tightened it. I forgot I did. I tightened it so that wouldn't be bouncing around as I was doing the hinges. I got my 7/16 ratcheting wrench. Need to get it loosened enough to give me a little wiggle room to get that in. It's a pretty rigid piece, so I think I need to move it from the top. Done this a couple times already, but I didn't have this bracket in there. Since I repaired the bracket, it's a little tighter. Got the bolt completely out. Okay, that's what I needed to do. Put that bolt back in, that will pull this motor tight enough within that bracket so that it will stay in place. And I'll just slip down so I can get it tight quick enough. I didn't think I was going to have room to put this light in here with the motor, but now that I've got the motor partway in, it appears that I do. Try to put one of the bolts in. To at least kind of hold it in place and kind of line up one of the holes.
forgot the plate. That's not good. Losing the plate. Try to handle 3 things at one time. You got the plate, the motor, and the bolt. Okay, the plate's started. Now I gotta get it lined up with the other 2 holes. I didn't realize how much that broken bracket was actually helping me in lining up this motor. The other times I took it out. Unfortunately, you cannot see in there. Might have the plate lined up with the second screw. If that's the case, it should be lined up with the third one. So I snug that up with that little fell out. Okay, there's a little alignment plate, or pin rather, on that plate, it seems. plate's not lined up. Now I believe it's lined up. I had that little tab on there above the place where it was supposed to go, and it felt like it was going in, but wasn't. Second bolt. Is in. Third bolt's way in the back. Kind of towards the top. Okay, that one started. Tighten up the bracket. Probably can't see the bracket that I'm tightening. Remember to point those out. Good idea after you get one or two of the bolts tightened to tighten them up by hand so that the wrench is more effective with the ratcheting, because otherwise it's very loose. Trouble finding the nut now. Okay, now that I've got all three in there, make sure the other two loosen up as I was tightening that third one. It's always a good idea to go back and check. That's in there. Hopefully now I can put some power to it and test the window. So I've got a hot wire jammed into one of the pins on the motor, and all I have to do is
hit the ground and watch the window. It's down. Whoops. My light's in there, that's what it hit. Take it back up. So now it's up, all the way down. Back up. Let's leave it down for now. Seems to work very well. So I am going to put the wire back on now. Hope you can see the window. Put the wire back on. We've already tested that for continuity to the wire under the console, and we tested the switch, and the switch works. Okay, you gotta squeeze the little tabs on that pin that goes in there, then you get a good connection. The last thing for now is put the cover back on. These are those pesky 8mm screws. And just fell out. I see it. I'm going to put the car down a little bit. I had lifted it up to get my lawnmower underneath to use the battery from that as my power source for this test. So, nothing exciting with watching me put in these few little bolts. So I am gonna cut the video here, and I must have dropped that. That's bent a little bit. I'm gonna have to take it off and straighten it out before I finish this. But that's pretty much all the stuff that's worthwhile showing on it. So I'm going to end this video here. Thanks for watching. It was, well, the door hinges were exciting. But like I said, I'm going to put that in a separate video. But now the door is functional. It closes properly, and the window works.